That's so good, man. I what I love about that is you're not intentionally reaching for you're intentionally reaching a broad audience rather than niching it down. But I would imagine, your faith comes out in conversations though, because how can it not leak out a little bit? And in that way, man, I think you probably have a bigger impact on unchurched people than you might even realize.
That's what I hope and pray each and every time I do an interview with someone, because sometimes I don't even know that they are a Christian, or I don't want to make the assumption that they are and then say it. And then they say like, I'm not a Christian. Like we are talking about, I'm a person of faith, but I'm not a Christian. Like, okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's good, dude. I love it.
But yeah, I 100%, my faith in God does come out in conversations all the time. And it's a lot of fun. I really, really love it. I feel like that's more who I am. But then the curious side of me comes out when people say, I'm a person of faith, but not in God. And I'm like, right, let's unpack that.
Yeah. And I guess that happens more and more often in an Australian post-Christian society, right?
Oh, all the time, man. I feel like Australia, especially, there's many people out there that reject God. They reject his teachings. There's this whole notion of now being woke. And I'm like, come on, man. Like it's a lost society that needs Jesus. Yeah. And you don't go about it. I've realized especially for Australians, you don't preach at them. You preach indirectly to them.
Yeah. By your actions, by the things that you do rather than the things that you know. Literally posted about this just the other day on my Instagram about the Hebrew biblical definition of faith is more about action. The word is literally a verb. Yet we've turned it into this intellectual thing, right? And when you start to talk about it like that, people think, oh, you're a progressive Christian, which for Christians is a really, like, it's almost an insult that you're a progressive Christian. And I saw somebody post just today on social media, progressive Christianity leads people towards, is a pit stop on the way to post-Christian. And I responded and said, no, progressive Christianity is a pit stop on the way to post-religion. The people who I know who I would label as progressive Christians are actually people who are not losing their faith. They're actually deepening their faith by going back to the first century roots of their faith, right? Rather than anything else. I think it's hilarious.
Why do you think so many people like nowadays have gone into sort of like this progressive mindset? Like, oh, I'm a progressive Christian, as opposed to, being overly conservative back in the day. Like they've changed so quickly.
Yeah, great question. Obviously, having spent 13 years in the States, it seems like everybody there who's a Christian is a conservative, right? But when I get back here to Australia and see that, research shows that only 8% of Australians go to church on a regular basis, and that regular basis is defined as once every 4 to 6 weeks, which proves that even people who attend church are not attending church in Australia. So you got 92% of the population who are essentially unchurched. They might say they're people of faith, but they're essentially unchurched. So I think this idea of progressive Christians, or like people who are thinking a little bit out of the box, I think it's in direct I think it's in direct response to religion, the system that we've built around the teachings of Jesus, and people not liking that that system has taken prevalence in a lot of societies, including Australia, taking prevalence over the teachings of Jesus. So people are more interested in the church rather than the person whose church it is. You know what I mean? That's where we get into that idea of, well, my church this and my church that, but I think it's people just becoming disenfranchised with what is happening in the space of quote unquote religion, organized religion, the systems that we've got set in place, and they want to just get back. And I know this is my journey as well. Just want to get back to, well, what did Jesus actually do? Like, what did he say? What did he do? And how can can I do that? And when you look at it from that point of view and you take away, you remove the system, you remove the liturgies, you remove all of those traditions, right, that have creeped into our faith, and you just look at the things that Jesus said and did, I don't know anybody who wouldn't want that. You know, you look at when you read the Gospels, what you find is that people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the case right now. Like if people actually just understood the teachings of Jesus minus the systems and the liturgies and the tradition, then they would actually like Jesus. And what they'd find is Jesus liked them back, right? The people who in the first century, people who followed Jesus around, they were nothing like him, but he liked them and they liked him. So I think that's what it is for me anyway. Would I call myself a progressive Christian? No, probably not. Would I call myself a deconstructed Christian? Probably, a little while ago I would have said that. Now, no, I just think I'm trying to. My faith in God is stronger than ever. My faith in Jesus is stronger than ever. But I also have more questions than ever, and that's the beauty of it, right? That's where it's supposed to be. There's this famous Jewish rabbi who marched with Martin Luther King in the 60s, right? His name is Abraham Joshua Heschel. He once said, "We are closer to God when we have questions than when we think we have all the answers." Is that not freaking brilliant? But in church, in the system, we don't get taught to question. We're like, it's that, I remember a bumper sticker when I was in my 20s that said, "God says it, I believe it, that settles it." And I thought that that's how it had to be. But now I realize, no, I've got questions and God's okay with my questions, because I look at the story of Abraham, right? God says, "I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah." Now, if Abraham lived up to that, "God said it, I believe it, that settles it" mantra, he would have said, "Okay, God, cool." But he didn't. He said, "Well, God, what if I can find 50 good people in that town?" And God says, "Well, okay, I won't destroy it then." "Well, what if I can only find 45? Well, okay, I won't destroy it." "Well, what if I only find 40? And he questions God, right? And he ultimately changes God's mind. He gets it down to 10 people, and God says, "Okay, go and find 10 people and I'll hold off destroying the city until that moment," right? But it's because he questioned. And that for me always reminds me of my daughters. When my daughters were a little bit younger, they'd be watching TV and I would say, "Hey, come on, girls, it's time for bed." "Oh, Dad, can we just have 5 more minutes?" "Yeah, okay." "Well, 5 more minutes go past." "Oh, come on, girls, bedtime." "Well, can we just wait till the next ad?" "Yeah, okay." "Well, what about if we wait till the end of they were doing the same thing as Abraham, right? They were negotiating with me. Why? Because they're guaranteed that I'm not going to think less of them for having questions and for them pushing back and negotiating with me, because my love for them is unconditional and they're aware of it. But I think it was the same for Abraham. But I think what church and religion has taught us is, no, God doesn't like questions. But I think when we do that, we stop wrestling with God. We stop, getting close enough to and having trust in his feelings towards us, like, for want of a better term, that it's okay for us to have those questions, and God's big enough to deal with those questions. So I like getting back to those questions. That's why that rabbinic saying has so much impact on me. I like people who have questions. I want to question everything. And if that means I don't fit in somewhere, well, that's okay. I'm going to keep having questions.
What's the number one question that you have currently forgot that you're still trying to answer to?
Dude, such a good question. And it changes. It probably changes for me every day. So as of right now, my biggest question is, it has to do with faith, but it has to do with current events, right? Because as we're talking, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is happening. And, most evangelicals are at that point of saying, well, this is a good thing because it means Jesus is coming back, because that's their interpretation of Revelation. But I always look at the point of view of, I don't think as Christians, we should be so eager to step over the Gospels to get to the book of Revelation. Now, what I mean by that is, you look at the Gospels, which is the 4 stories told about Jesus's life, and Jesus was always love your neighbor. That is like the prevalent thing. Everything on scripture hangs on this. Love God and love your neighbor. Yet we're so eager that, come on, Jesus, come back and save me, right? That we step over the people who are who are getting hurt in the process of doing that. So my question for God around that is, God, why are Christians like this? Why are we known for what we are against instead of being known for what we are for? And what I'm for is I've got friends who are Palestinians living in the West Bank, and my heart breaks for what they're going through, and I want to help them. But I've also got friends who are Jewish who live in Jerusalem, and my heart breaks for what's happening to them as well. You know what I mean? So it's not as black and white as we think it is, and it's just boils down to, let's not be so eager to get to Revelations that we step all over the Gospels and what Jesus actually taught us to do, which is to love the people who are around us and care for them in the best way that we possibly can.
And we still have an entire world really to reach for Christ before he even returns. So
yeah,
there's also that. And I don't think we should necessarily try and create a sense of fear and urgency about everything that's going on. Sure, he's coming back. I'm excited that he's coming back. But it's in his time, not my time. And he said that events are going to transpire. There's going to be wars, rumors of wars. There's going to be false doctrines. There's going to be false prophets. There's going to be all kinds of things that are going to pop up. And sure, we're seeing it. But my question to God is, like, to what extent does it have to be before we get like that close to hearing the trumpet? Yeah. Like that's it's pretty bad, but my thought process around it is, how bad is bad? That it's enough that is like, okay, now's the time.
Yeah, right. Because you know that during World War I, people were thinking the same thing. You know that during World War II, they were thinking the same thing. So it's not like this is the first time in history that anybody's ever thought that this might be happening soon. And so this is where, honestly, Jay, my focus always goes back to, I don't think we should be so concerned about getting people to heaven as much as we should be concerned about getting heaven to people. That's what I think Jesus talked about. And that's what I try to do. Like, do I want my unchurched friends and neighbors to know who Jesus is? Yeah, 100%. How do they do that? They do that by me bringing that to them. And that happens in the way that I talk, the way that I post to social media, the way that I care, the way that I welcome people, the way that I love my neighbors. There's this idea in rabbinic Judaism that every table is an altar, like an altar, altar, right? Which for Christians, an altar is the place where the priest or the pastor preaches from on Sundays, or it's the place that holds the Bible in the church, right? That's the altar. It's this godly place. But in rabbinic Judaism, every table is an altar. And the indication of like a dinner table is an altar. A coffee table in a cafe is an altar where you can experience and worship God while sitting across from somebody else, having a conversation, having a meal. And you think about it from the point of view of Jesus, right? How many times when people said, "Hey, Jesus, what's heaven going to be like?" And Jesus said, "Well, it's kind of like a man who had a banquet," right? He's talking about people gathered around a table sharing a meal. Like he literally backs up that idea. And it's not that it needs to be a table, and it's not that it needs to be a meal. I would say this right now, Jay, is the potential to be an altar, a place where we can experience God, a place where we can worship God. This is where it happens. It doesn't have to happen in a building. If COVID taught us anything in the church world, it's that, you don't have to be inside a church building to experience God. When you look at, again, just look at the Bible. You look at Abraham, he worshiped God. Well, Adam, go back even further, right? The story that opens up the whole Bible, Adam and Eve. Adam worshiped God in a garden. Moses worshiped God on a mountaintop. Jesus worshiped God in a desert. I don't need to be inside a building to worship God. I can worship God anywhere. And that typically happens when we have people sitting around a table and we're sharing life with them. So I think Christians need to stop building walls and start building bigger tables to welcome and invite people to come and sit around that table. People of all races, all ethnicities, all backgrounds, right? All lifestyles. Let's start having conversations with people around the table, because the thing is, everything changes when it's someone you know, right? Christians always want to have a common enemy, whatever that common enemy might be at the particular time. But when you're sitting across the table from somebody who you've been told is unchurched, who's told is unchristian, who you've been told is a sinner, when you get to know them and hear their story, everything changes. You know, and so I think there's something. I think there's something about that. Does that make me progressive? Maybe it does. Maybe I am a progressive Christian. Maybe I'm realizing right now, talking to you, Jay, that I'm a progressive Christian. But I think it's actually, maybe it's a regressive Christian, because I think I'm just getting back to the first century ideals around how Jesus can impact my life. You know, my old boss, Andy Stanley, used to say, following Jesus makes my life better and makes me better at life. And that was how he presented the gospel. That's how he preached to people, right? If he had to share his faith. And I love that so much, because I look at my own life, my own background, my own history, my own childhood, my chaotic childhood. And I look at it and I go, yeah, following Jesus, which I started doing when I was, in year 12 in high school, that has made my life better, and it's made me better at life. It's made me a better dad. It's made me a better husband. It's made me a better friend. I like to think it's made me a better man and a better human being. So, I think it just I like to boil it all down just to that, which for me is super simplistic, which ironically is what Jesus said, right? He said, hey, my interpretation of the Bible is easy and it's light, and you can handle it and you can do it and you can understand it, more importantly. Well, how do we understand it? Well, love God, love people. That's faith. Gotcha. That's super easy to understand. He never had to use big words like premillennialism, postmillennialism, like he didn't use he just said, love God, love people. Everything hangs on that. And I think if there are more Christians just simply doing that, maybe Australia wouldn't be as post-Christian as it is.
We were originally Christian. We were founded on Christian principles, like if you look at history, but we've fallen away from that. And there's been this, I guess, the Christians today, they're being branded as being wrong, and they're being asked all kinds of questions because there's a lot of hate. There's a lot of hate towards Christians, and that's not what Jesus was like at all. He preached love thy enemy, love thy neighbor. And I'm always like, for me doing this, sure, I speak to people, different faiths, different ideas, beliefs, but I don't try and convince someone why my way is better than their way. That's not my job. I don't force anyone to listen. I don't force anyone to believe anything. It's ultimately what I believe is what I talk about all the time. God created an amazing gift called a choice, free will, the ability to choose. But for most of and you sort of see it in Australia and even over in America, you got a certain system of people that have this certain way of looking at the world, looking at Christianity as being such a cultist sort of movement that they've branded them in such a way that they're all automatically unaccepting. It's just, it's crazy. But for me, if I was to look at my life and all the things that I've gone through, without Jesus, without God in my life, I wouldn't be here. That's the honest truth.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man.
Dude, I'm exactly the same. But it's so interesting, right? That I don't know if you knew this, but we in Australia, we know that term Bible bashing. Don't Bible bash me. Did you know that term was invented in Australia in the 1800s?
No.
Back then, Christians were known to be people who Bible bashed others, right? And that there's an aggression around that. There's a certain, treating people as if they have to go your way, or they're not in, or they're not. We were making it exclusive back in the Christianity exclusive back in the 1800s when Jesus was all about making it inclusive. Like he was like, hey, come, I'm going to go. He sat with so often with people who the religious leaders were against. The irony there, right? The religious leaders were more like Jesus, but they didn't like Jesus. Yeah. And they didn't like him because he hung out with people who they said were unacceptable. Yeah. Yet Jesus went and spent time with them. Yet we've flipped that on its head somewhere along the way. Part of my story is even just having, I've got a lot of friends who are Jewish, who are rabbis, Messianic rabbis, Orthodox rabbis. I've got a bunch of friends in that world. And I remember talking to an Orthodox Jewish rabbi a few years ago, who's a really good friend of mine, Rabbi Lubin in Madison, New Jersey. And he, during the course of conversation, after many conversations with him, he said to me one day, the topic got around to Jesus. And so I asked him the question that I think a lot of Christians have for rabbis specifically, because rabbis have memorized the first 5 books of the Bible. Like they've memorized them. The average Christian probably couldn't quote 5 verses. They've memorized 5 books. Like it's insane. But I was talking with him about Jesus, and I said to him, hey, how do you feel about Jesus? Like, why do you not think that Jesus is the Messiah? And over the course of the conversation, he said that he sees Jesus as being like this amazing, incredible, renowned Jewish rabbi, but he doesn't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Like he was a rabbi with authority, but he isn't the Messiah. And I said, well, why is that? Why do you think that? And he said, well, Jews judge a rabbi based on the actions of their followers. Man, and in saying that, I just remember being floored. Like, so you judge Jesus's authority based on my behavior or the behavior of Christians. And he went on to talk about how destructive and divisive Christians have been throughout all of human history, almost, right? Dating back to the Crusades even, and the Spanish Inquisition. Like, we've been destructive and we've been divisive. And that's why he doesn't think Jesus is the Messiah, because if he was, his followers would be a lot better. And that for me is just another one of those, oh my gosh, we've gotten this so wrong. I've got a pastor friend named Jeff Henderson who always says, for too long, the church has been known for what we are against. It's time we were known for what we are for. And it's so true, right? It's so true. It's the true in America, where I lived for 13 years, 100% true there. Christians are known for what they're against, right? And you could probably even, if we did a poll of your listeners, they would be able to list the things that American Christians are against. But when I come back to Australia, it's the same thing. That's what I'm experiencing here. That's what my unchurched family members, my unchurched friends are telling me it's like here as well. And I'm learning that it's all different things, but it's also kind of the same things. But we're known for what we're against. And I think it's time that shifted and we started letting people know what we're for. And personally, as a Christian, I'm for my neighbors. I'm for people. I'm for Australians. Like, because Jesus has made my life better, I think he can make other people's life better as well. But I'm not going to force that on them in any way, shape, or form. I'm just going to try and be an example of that, right? As a dad, one of the first things you learn is that your kids will follow your example more than they follow your opinion, right? And I think it's the same with faith. People will follow your example more than they follow your opinion, and they're drawn to your example.
I think you said it perfectly, man. Like, history will give us all the answers that we need to the present day questions. Might not exactly give us the answers to future questions, but always present day. And if you look at the select few people sorry, we froze there for a second.
What happened?
Internet. If you look at the select few people throughout history that did everything for a cause in the name of Christ, do you really believe that Christ was in it in the first place, or was it just them saying that they were doing it for Christ as just a way, like, same with Muslims, same with Buddhists, same with all these belief systems, doing it for the sake of something, doing it for a so-called purpose or a plan.
Yeah.
And you look at where that took everybody to where it's taken us now, and then now we're in a hole because that's not what God stood for. And then now we're trying to undo what has been done for centuries. And it's like,
good, dude.
It's really, really difficult for a person like me to be someone that claims the name of Christ and is not persecuted for it. I mean, God said that was going to happen anyway. He said, blessed be the persecuted for my name's sake. And I have nothing against that at all. And in fact, I welcome it. But having conversations with people, it's not as easy as you and I just conversing. It's so much, they're vehemently opposed to you saying anything about Jesus. Oh, don't preach at me. Don't preach at me.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to share a story.
Yeah.
That is hopefully going to be helpful to you.
Yeah. And isn't it, I think the part of the antidote to that, Jay, is understanding that the word faith is a verb, right? It's based on the things that we do, not on the things that we know. And so based on that, I think we all preach what we believe in or what we don't believe in without us even realizing it. It just comes out in what in the way we conduct ourselves. You talk to an AFL supporter for any more than 10 minutes, or like a really passionate AFL supporter for more than 10 minutes, and they're going to talk about, or they're going to show you that what they're passionate about because they can't help it. I think it should be the same for people of faith, right? But it should come out not in just our words, but in our actions. People should see a sense of peace around Christians, not a sense of chaos. They should see a sense of servanthood, not a sense of vying for influence. They should see in people of faith, what they should see is people who are more concerned about what is right instead of who is right. But in our modern, quote unquote, woke society, in our cancel culture society, right? Too often we're concerned about who is right over being concerned about what is right. And I think that's where we miss the boat a lot. One of my rabbi friends, a rabbi from Chicago, he once told me this great Jewish phrase. He said, argue for the sake of heaven instead of arguing for the sake of power. Gosh, how often do we get that wrong? How often do we argue, especially on social media? Let's be super candid, especially on social media, we argue for the sake of power. Nobody has ever had their life changed by a single tweet or a response to a tweet, right? Yet we think it's our, it's our right, or it's our job to drag people through the mud on social media. Why do we do that? Like, isn't this supposed to be the place where we're being a reflection of what we believe in? The only way that people are going to believe in the Jesus that we believe in is if we become everything that he says we're supposed to be. That means people who love their neighbor, people who are for the people around them, people who are out to do good in the world. Christians, people in Australia, man, when they think of Christians, here's my hope. My hope is that at some point, somebody in I'm on the Sunshine Coast, right? And I'm hoping that what will happen is people will say, hey, you know what? I don't know if I agree with everything that those Christians talk about. I don't know if I agree with that book they always go on about, but those Christians are the most compassionate, the most generous people in our entire community. Hey, you know what? I don't know if I agree with all the stuff they sing about constantly. It's kind of weird, but man, they are the most trusting, the most integrity-filled people in our whole town. I want people to get to the point where they say, I don't know if I agree with what they say about Jesus, but I want my son or my daughter to marry a Christian, because I know they're marrying somebody who's upright, moral, has good values. I don't know if I agree with what they say about the Bible and the book of Revelation and Jesus coming back. I don't know if I agree with that, but I want to hire somebody who's a Christian because I know I'm going to get a hard worker. I know I'm going to get somebody who's trustworthy. That's what our reputation should be in Australia. Instead, it's not. It's about the things that we're against, and it's about us being argumentative and us being against people. Like, when did that happen?
You know what I think that we should be doing, and I've always said this actually, if you want to change a generation, you teach the kids.
Yeah.
So
I agree. But how do we teach the kids? Well, because the kids aren't coming to churches. We know that, right?
So we've
got to go out to them. So what is the modern marketplace? The modern marketplace is YouTube. How are we leveraging YouTube, for example? Yeah, exactly. It's your phone. And did you know 37% of all mobile internet traffic on your cell phone is people watching YouTube? That's 37% of all internet traffic is people watching YouTube. Where are the churches who are out on YouTube? You know, YouTube is the place where people go to find answers for everything, from fixing their car to fixing their marriage. So where are the people of faith? Where are the churches on YouTube? And what are they putting out there to reach that next generation, to reach those kids? That's where we have to change up what we're doing and provide content that's just helpful for life, not just, you know, rants and raves about who's in and who's out, and that make us even further inclusive and keep the rest of Australian society at arm's length. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean perfectly. Like, I've found it difficult to put out Christian content on YouTube because it will either get censored, like it'll be kind of cancelled. I won't say fully cancelled, but it'll just be, it won't hit the algorithm as much. So
yeah. But there's ways around that, dude. There's so many different ways around that. What frustrates me around stuff like that, and you certainly didn't do this, but I hear so many pastors say, oh my gosh, my video of my message only got 30 views. I'm being persecuted by big tech. No, you're not being persecuted. Your content's not very good, or you're not leveraging the platform to its unique full potential, right? And so that's one of the things I love doing. You know, as a social media pastor, is helping people like yourself, helping churches and ministries reach more people so they can change more lives. And doing that is just some of the tricks and the hacks and the little workarounds to, you know, the algorithm is always going to be an issue, but it should never be an excuse. And just because if you're a pastor listening to this and you feel like you're being persecuted because you've only got 30 views, or you only got 12 likes on Instagram, or you've got only a couple of hundred followers, you're not being persecuted. There are people literally around the world who are literally being persecuted for their faith. You're not. Just, you know, create content that people actually want to see and that actually adds value to people's lives. Start doing that, and then you'll see that things improve.
Make sure to put it into perspective. Like, you don't have it bad compared to all the other people around the world that are facing the hardships for their faith. So you're blessed if you're in a first world country, to be honest with you, to be a person of faith and freedoms and liberties and all that sort of stuff. And I've noticed with my own social media, if I start doing videos or I do talks, or if it's like me just speaking and giving advice and stories and all that, I get more engagement than I do if I post about somebody else. It's a weird thing. Yeah. And I've always
Yeah, too often we think that the only stuff that gets that gets traction on social media is really highly produced content, and that's because we've always been told when it comes to social media, content is king. Yep. I would argue that context is king, and what I mean by that is when you're speaking authentically, right? And you're being genuine and you're speaking into your own context, and that connects with somebody in their context, that's when your post will get engagement. That's when your video will get lots of views. That's when you're actually the most relevant, right? In church world, we think relevance is, you know, smoke machines and fancy lights and you know, people on stage who wear skinny jeans and really deep V-neck t-shirts and have the cool glasses, right? But I think relevance is actually when, you know, if I'm stuck in the desert for 2 weeks and I'm stranded, and Jay, you come along and you give me a bottle of water and some salada crackers, you are the most relevant person in the world to me because you met my need right when I had it the most. And I don't care whether or not you've got a smoke machine behind you or what you're wearing. It's what you're doing for me that makes you relevant in my life. That's real relevance. And I think we need to get back to a little bit more of that as well, understanding that context is king. And if we're putting stuff out on social media that's of value to people and answering questions that they're asking, that's when we're relevant, because we're contextualizing our content to whatever their situation is.
That's brilliant. I noticed, like, I want to be mindful of your time as well. 2 final questions, if you don't mind. But I've always looked at, I guess you could say, people's sharing habits. And in my circles, at least, I've noticed it's a certain specific thing all the time. It's usually dumb stuff most of the time. And I'm like, why is this getting shared? I'm not accusing anyone at all, but I've always noticed the good context stuff, even if it's well produced, that, for me at least, doesn't get shared as much.
Yeah.
But I've noticed when I'm actually authentically me and sharing stuff, that somehow gets shared more. So I wanted to say that.
Yeah. No, that's good.
So this is my all-time favorite question I ask everyone at the end. So it's a hypothetical one, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for sake of argument. But they've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
I thought you were going to ask me, who do I want to play me in that film? That's where I thought this was going. And you made it so much deeper than that. So I think that speaks volumes of your character and not so much of mine. What do I want that to say? I think it goes, probably the first thing that pops into my head, Jay, is I want it to go back to what I said earlier, that I want people to watch that and be able to say, you know what? Following Jesus made his life better and made him better at life. I'd like to think that it would say that I, wasn't always perfect, but was always willing to learn. I think, and again, back to what we said previously, I would love for it to say that I asked good questions throughout my whole life. That's what I want it to say, because that idea of asking good questions means that I'm constantly open-handed about my opinions, that I'm open to learning new things. A friend of mine once said that he doesn't trust anybody who's never changed their mind. And I think you change your mind by asking good questions. When my girls leave for school every morning, one of the things I say to them every morning when they walk out the door is I say, make sure you ask good questions today. And that's not necessarily just asking good questions of the teacher, but that's just asking good questions throughout the day. Because, there's a saying that says, a smart person gives smart answers, but a wise person asks smart questions. And so I just want to be somebody who will always ask smart questions. I think that's what I would want the film to say mostly.
I love that. This is my final question. So,
have we been recording this whole time? I thought we were just having a chat. This is awesome.
How about that? So that's the beauty of the storybook. Sometimes we go on a riff and then I just keep it going. I don't even bother.
I love it.
Again.
I love it.
But my last question for you, Dave, is when in your life, when you least expected God to show up in a big way that he has, that it's challenged your perspective on your life and who God is?
Do you ask everybody this question?
No.
So when has God shown up in my life in a big way that challenged my perspective?
Yes, on your life and who God is.
So I think the first thing that pops into my head, Jay, is this. And I don't know if this is the right answer, and I might change it as I talk, right? As words start coming out of my mouth, I might change it. But here's the first thing that popped in my head. I think the time that I experienced God in a way that changed my perspective of everything was when I realized that what, man had meant for evil, God had meant for good. Now, what I mean by that, for me, that's a Bible verse that comes out of the story of Joseph, which I'm sure whether your listeners are church people or not church people, I'm sure they've heard the story of Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We've all heard that story. But as part of that story, Joseph gets to a point where after he's been sold into slavery by his brothers, dumped into a well, accused of a crime he didn't commit, spent years in jail, he gets to the point of saying, hey, his faith lets him say, what man meant for evil, all these bad things, God meant for good. And that for me is a picture of repentance. But when I think of that story, I think of my own childhood, quite honestly. In my own childhood, by the time I started primary school, by the time I was 6 and started primary school, the sexual abuse from an uncle started in my life. And that went on for 6 years. By the time I started high school, what was happening at home had such an impact on me and my personality that by the time I started high school, I started getting really bullied because I was just the withdrawn, shy kid, right? Didn't want to stand out, just wanted to hide into a ball, no self-esteem, no self-confidence, all of those things. Didn't know God at that point, and I honestly don't know where I would be in my life. But then in year 12, getting this first experience of God and experiencing it for the first time and understanding that my faith is going to make my life better, make me better at life. And then seeing a shift in my whole perspective towards myself, a shift in my whole perspective of my life, moving from believing that my life was just broken and could never be put back together to a point where going, you know what? God can actually turn this into something good. And being able to share my story of God turning my life around 180, that's a huge thing for me that changed my perspective of not just God, but of everything. And I think growing up, I always questioned if there is a God up there, then why is he allowing to happen to me what's happening to me at home almost every night? Like, why is he allowing that if he really loves me? But as I grew older and sort of grew into it, I realized that what man meant for evil, God actually meant for good. And as I've shared my story, whether it's sharing it from, stage at a church or a church event, if it's sharing it on a podcast, I spent 7 years as a TV sports reporter for Channel 10 in Melbourne. And that gave me the opportunities to share my story in school camps and all sorts of things, and seeing the number of people that my story of hope, my story of redemption has helped give other people hope. That's when I can get to that point of saying what man meant for evil, what my uncle meant for evil, God meant for good, and he's going to turn that into something good. So that was the thing that I think stepped into when I experienced God and realized that God had a different plan for that I could never have predicted, that it not only changed my perspective of God and how much God cares about me, but it also changed my perspective on everything in life. It changed my perspective on my own sense of purpose, my own sense of hope, but gave me the ability to provide that to other people, hopefully provide that to other people as well.
That is powerful, man. Wow. It's probably the best answer I've had to that question.
Oh, wow. Really?
I'm not kidding. Like that was unreal. Thank you for being open enough to share what actually happened to you as a kid.
Yeah, man.
Especially because your uncle. I'm sorry that happened to you. I understand like experiencing what sexual abuse is like from a very young age. It's not good. It's traumatic. It does more damage to you than good. But what I've realized as a 24-year-old right now is that instead of asking God, why is this happening to me? We should be asking him instead, what? What are you trying?
100%.
What is this for? What are you trying to show me in my life? What is missing that I'm not seeing? The moment we do that, our perspective shifts, our life changes, and we start seeing God's hand in literally everything.
I couldn't agree more, dude. Couldn't agree more. I had the opportunity 2 years ago to go to Israel. Like I do a lot of work with some companies in Israel, and I go to Israel on a regular basis. Pre-COVID, I was going on a regular basis, right? And I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to be in Israel, recording a whole bunch of YouTube videos, and we spent a week in the Judean wilderness. And this place is like like no life, completely isolated. And for one of the videos, one of the guys who was field producing, he said to me, hey, we need you to walk off into the desert as far as you can possibly go, probably a mile and a half, 2 miles. And so I walked, and they wanted me to do that so they could get a drone shot, right? They had drones flying around me and all sorts of things. I'll give you a link to the video so you can see, and maybe you can leave it in show notes or something. But anyway, as I remember walking out, and as I was walking out, literally in the desert, and couldn't see anybody, like I'd gotten to the point where I couldn't see anybody. I remember thinking, gosh, how many people feel like this in their life right now, that they're in the middle of a desert, this isolated place where life seems really hard, where life seems really barren, and you're not sure how you're going to get out of it, and you're not sure if you're even going to be able to take the next step forward. How often have I felt like that in my life, right? And what I realized in those moments as the sun was going down, like it was this amazing scene, I was like, I'm literally in the desert, but I've also figuratively been in the desert many times. And whenever I'm in that place, I always ask God, when are you going to get me out of this desert? Mm-hmm. When is this going to end? And instead of saying, God, when am I going to get out of the desert? We should be saying, God, what am I going to get out of the desert? What lessons do you have for me that I can only learn in this place? So sometimes, when we're in those situations, we say, when is this going to be over, God? When am I going to be out of this situation? When we should be asking, what am I going to get out of this situation? Mm-hmm. That shift in perspective can literally change a person's life. And that's not a faith thing. That's not a God thing. That's just a thing. Like, I think we all need to have that perspective when we're facing tough times, because we're all going to go through them, whether you have faith or you don't. You're going to face hard times. And in those moments, are you asking, when am I going to get out of this? Or are you asking, what am I going to get out of this? That's the key, I think.
I love that. I was speaking with Christine Kane recently, and she said, God never promises to us that we won't go through deserts, but he always promises to be there walking with us while we're in the desert. It's That's our choice, though, to see him. And I talk about this in my first book, actually, which I've got to send to you. I think you might like it. It's let challenges serve you. The moment we serve challenges, all we are doing is giving off our power and allowing the challenge to control our lives, our thoughts, our beliefs, everything, which just keeps us stuck, deflated. We don't see God in anything. Then we're miserable. We're depressed. It lead to all that. But when we say, "Hey, I'm going to embrace challenges into my life. I am going to not serve them, but let them serve me." Reverse it. Then you can start seeing the challenges are for your benefit. They make you stronger than. For a person that doesn't go through challenges, I mean, what kind of a life would that be? It'd be very, very boring.
Yeah, that's good.
Challenges enable us to see things other people's can never see. Challenges
so true.
Show us really who God is, who we are as people.
Yeah.
We're finite human beings. We're not fallible. And I believe God did that for a number of reasons. So we don't get too proud. He wants to show us that humility is the way, not ego. Yeah. Look what happened to Satan. And he does it through challenges, through hard times, struggles, trauma, you name it. But once again, he gives us the choice.
Yeah. And Jay, have you noticed that when you speak to a Christian, they say, well, if I become a Christian, is my life going to be perfect? Is everything going to be lined up? Is the path that I walk on going to be really like level and no rocks, and it's going to be really comfortable? But we never get promised that in scripture, right? But yet still, when we face a mountain in our life, like there's a hill that we pray and say, God, take the mountain away, make it level, make it easy on me, right? But if you read scripture, it says, give me the feet of a deer that I may ascend to the high places. Like it literally says, don't pray that God will take the mountain away. Pray that God will give you what you need to get over the mountain. Because once you're on the top of that mountain, the view changes, your perspective changes, but it only comes by climbing up that mountain and going through the hard stuff to get there. That's that idea of what man meant for evil, God meant for good, because we're going to face mountains in life. And we get to choose we don't get a choice in that, right? The one thing we do get to choose is our attitude to those hard times, our attitude to that desert, our attitude to that mountain. That's the one thing we have got a choice over. So I would be saying, choose the right attitude.
Damn. I need to send you my book. I think you would
do it.
I think you'd really like it.
I would love that. Do it.
This has been such a good conversation, man. I could speak to you forever.
Thanks, man. I've really enjoyed it too.
Man, got to have you back on later on, but thank you so much for coming on the Storybox podcast, round 1.
I love it. Thanks, man.